in the myth of normal, you do talk about attachment and authenticity, and I would love to kind of dive into the topic of attachment and the topic of authenticity. But before we get into that, can you just kind of break down, like, what do those two things mean in relation to human development?
Well, so let me ask this audience a question, and I can't see your faces very well, but I can see your hands if you raise them. How many of you had the experience of having a strong gut feeling about something, and then you ignored it, and you were sorry afterwards? Okay, most of you, okay? Those gut feelings are your authentic self. You're born with them. We're born with gut feelings. In fact, infants, that's all they have. They don't have thoughts. They don't have memories. They have their gut feelings. When you raised your hand to indicate that at some point you had gut feelings you ignored, you're telling about your childhood. Something happened in your childhood that made you divorced from your gut feelings so that you don't even feel them, or even when you do, you don't believe them. And then you suffer. So what happened? Well, if you look at human beings, how we evolved in nature, and until the blink of an eye ago, we all lived out in nature. I mean, civilization is like 5 minutes on the clock, you know, as compared to human existence. We lived out in nature. How long does any creature in nature survive without being connected to their gut feelings? And auto simply means the self. So authenticity is going to be connected to yourself. So that is necessary for survival. So what happens? Well, another need that we have as infants, and as mammalian infants, whether we're mice or whales or cats or elephants or humans.
Don't say dogs.
Yeah. We need to be connected, we need to be attached, we need to be looked after, to be held, to be looked after, to be nurtured, to be protected, guided. And that's called attachment, that connection with another creature for the sake of being nurtured and protected is called attachment. So we have a powerful attachment drive in our brains, which is also necessary for friendship amongst the three of you, for partnership with spouses and other people. So attachment is just an important human dynamic for which we're wired. Great. So ideally, we can be ourselves, connected to ourselves, and be attached. Well, what happens in a lot of families, as happened with my kids, is one example, because of my own limitations and traumas as a parent, but happens in a lot of families, is kids get the message, if that they're authentically themselves, they're not acceptable. Their anger is not acceptable, their joy is not acceptable, their curiosity is not acceptable, their pain, their grief is not acceptable, the sadness, cheer up, nothing to be upset about, you know? Or if you're angry, get out of here. Well, the child gets the message, if I'm authentic, I can't be attached. Now there's an impossible, what we call a tragic tension in this book is, if I'm authentic, I won't be accepted. If I want to be accepted, I have to suppress my authenticity. And this is unconscious, it's automatic, it's not a choice the child consciously makes. It's a protective, adaptive mechanism. It gets wired into us, and for the rest of our lives, we're afraid to be ourselves for fear of being rejected. And that process doesn't just happen in the family of origin, it happens in the schools. It happens on the job, it happens throughout this culture. So we all present a certain face to the world, and underneath it, there's this little self that's afraid to express itself. So that's the tension between authenticity and attachment. Now that tension is a major source of both mental and physical illness, according to me and according to a lot of science. So that's why it's so important. So a lot of people get into their late 20s, 30s, maybe 40s, and they say, whose life am I leading anyway? And who am I? You know? And that's because they've been programmed not to be themselves. And just to finish this, there was a book published maybe 12 years ago by an Australian palliative care nurse. She worked with people...
Bronnie Ware.
Dying people, yeah.
Yeah.
And the book was called, and I used to work in palliative care. People who died before their time because of malignancy or chronic illness. And the book is called The Top 5 Regrets of Dying People. And you know what the top regret of dying people is? I'm talking about people who died before their time, is that they were not themselves, that they tried to please other people all their lives rather than be themselves, rather than express their emotions. That's the top regret. And that's because of what I just said.